In the last several decades, we learned to overvalue skepticism, even use it as a label in itself, as if you're skeptic about something, anything really, then that's some sort of a virtue. But during this process, a significant chunk of individuals have also developed an aversion to fair questions, in addition to a complete trust of the cathedral and the so-called studies. A few months ago, someone asked me for a study to back up my claim that girls sexually mature slightly earlier than boys, a fact widely known, observed, and acknowledged by anyone over the age of 15 that is, not insane. 2 weeks ago, I was asked for a study to back up the claim that there are only two sexes. If you remember, back in the immemorial times of late 2015 and 2016, all of us on the non-left were asked for citations when we were pointing out obvious things like the fact that most refugees are actually fighting-age men and not really refugees, nor actually from Syria. We were called lying racists for that because, you see, noticing that Syrians and Eritreans actually do look different and it's easy to see who is who, well, you see, that's racist. And since there is no study to show this, then that means it's false. Because that's how modern culture understands skepticism. Blind allegiance to anyone with titles to his name, even if it's blatantly obvious that that person is a loon. See the militant communist university professors for reference to that. But what if there are studies to show what we've been saying for years now? What if, no matter how much you try, no amount of academic drivel can bend the truth enough? Let's explore. Hello everyone and welcome to the Freedom Alternative in what is likely the first video in the new studio. So, this video is to be filed under "A study has revealed that the grass tends to be green, particularly during summertime" category. Coming from the local Deutschland, German media failed to report refugee crisis honestly, study finds. Gee, you think? What's next? A study that shows the cathedral is horribly and intentionally biased against Donald Trump? Oh wait, that has also happened. Anyway, so let's read from this. Quote, "An influential German institute has studied thousands of articles published by daily newspapers during the refugee crisis. Their conclusion? Journalists lost their objectivity and drove a wedge through society. As hundreds of thousands of refugees arrived in Germany in 2015 and early 2016, daily newspapers took on the role of public educators rather than objective critics of public policy, a team of researchers at the Otto Brenner Institute concluded according to a report in Die Zeit this week. The researchers, led by former Die Zeit editor Michael Haller, studied thousands of articles published between February 2015 and March 2016 by leading daily newspapers, including Bild, Die Welt, die Süddeutsche Zeitung, and the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. The report, which will be published on Monday, criticized the so-called mainstream media for lining up behind Chancellor Angela Merkel's open-door refugee policies and for uncritically taking on the slogans of the political elite. The journalists used the slogan Willkommenskultur, the welcoming culture, to put moral pressure on citizens to contribute to the cause of supporting refugees, the study finds. People who criticized the government policy were treated by journalists as suspect and potentially racist. At the same time, the newspapers saw it as their role to educate such people on becoming better human beings, the study argues. Most journalists failed in their job as someone who is supposed to objectively explain the world to readers, Haller told Die Zeit. News articles were often infused with the opinion of the journalist, whilst the opinions of normal citizens, of experts, and of asylum seekers themselves were often ignored, he added. The report concludes that the moralistic reporting by the major newspapers massively contributed to a loss of trust in the mainstream media and a split in German society. Over 1 million asylum seekers arrived in Germany in total in 2015 and 2016, with numbers rising sharply after the government opened its borders in late August 2015. At the height of the crisis, tens of thousands of people passed into the country every day. The arrival of huge numbers of refugees led to the rise of the Alternative for Germany, a far-right party which consistently opposed the government's refugee policy. In national elections in September, the AfD are predicted to become the first party further to the right of Merkel's conservative CDU to make it into the Bundestag in post-war history. The term Lügenpresse, the lying press, simultaneously became a popular term used at rallies held by the AfD and the anti-Islam Pegida movement. Newspapers and broadcasters came in for particularly harsh criticism after hundreds of women in Cologne and other cities reported being sexually assaulted at New Year celebrations at the end of 2015. The national media took days to pick up on the story, leading critics to claim that they were afraid to report on crimes which portrayed asylum seekers in poor light. Well, I mean, I don't necessarily want to say I told you so, but I really told you so. And not just me, I mean, I'm just a small fish in this water. The wider mass of normal people have been saying this for years. And although I'm still getting some minor pushback when I make videos like the "all of the media is fake news," by and large, most people have already gotten the message long before this study emerged, that what you see on TV and read in the mainstream papers is, by and large, well, horse manure. And this tells you who is really the rigid conservative here, and it's definitely not us. We on the non-left adapted and readapted quickly once conditions changed or new facts became available. But the cathedral didn't. And by cathedral, I don't mean just the cathedral media, but the entirety of the disinformation complex. The academe, the bureaucrats, yes, the deep state, the mass indoctrination centers, commonly referred to as public schools, and the rest of the machinery that considers itself as mainstream society, even though it has gotten further and further away from what the mainstream society actually is. But we adapted to all of that, yet the cathedral needed, 2 years to come up with the conclusion that the Lügenpresse is real? 2 years? The whole course of history can be changed in 2 days, and these schmucks need 2 years to notice something as obvious and as clear-cut as the fact that the media lies in lockstep? Really? Also, a few words on the term Die Lügenpresse. I've had a few in the past coming in the comments warning me that to be careful with the term because it was used by the Nazis, and I'm like, yeah, so? In fact, the most used word by the Nazis was die, which is the definitive feminine article, followed by das, the definitive neuter article. The combination das Dokument was pretty common in day-to-day Nazi operations. Should that be avoided too? The point is that I don't share this fake skin on anything that might possibly, via a severe stretch of reality and via a serious bending of common sense, have something to do with the Nazis. The term itself is older than the birth of Hitler's father and has been prominent in mid-19th century when the Catholic Church was battling what they perceived as slander from the liberal press. And now that I mention this, I should also probably mention that I think the Catholics had a point. So no, sorry, when it comes to the German media, Die Lügenpresse is a highly accurate description that I shall employ for as long as it will be applicable, and I suspect its applicability will not wane anytime soon, since the German cathedral sees, or at least seems, determined to double down on the lies and on the disdainful nonsense that they push, aided by an utterly censorious government that cracks down on private citizens in a manner that that is making the Islamic Republic of Iran blush. A few days ago, I was chatting, or better said, exchanging tweets with one of the few liberal backers of this channel. Now notice that I say liberal and not leftist. The distinction matters. Anyway, his argument was one that I routinely hear, namely that the media can reform itself and that we should help the media to reform because otherwise we would be, quote, stuck in this fact-free world one way or another forever, unquote. Now, this kind of argument is often heard not just amongst liberals, but also amongst conservatives who still don't get it. This was something serious to ponder upon 10 or 15 years ago maybe, when things were still salvageable. In 2002, most people still believed that the press is not full of lies, even though it was. So there could realistically be or have been a solution to pressure the worst elements of the Lügenpresse out, moderate the media, and slowly get it somewhat back on track. But you see, that was then. That opportunity simply no longer exists. In the current year, we have multi-billion media conglomerates going after a private citizen for creating a meme. In the current year, we have incontrovertible evidence that the media lies intentionally and in lockstep, and it does this as a matter of routine. Because it's not just mass immigration stuff or Trump memes, it's almost everything. Sexual politics, technology, economics, you name it. It's really hard to think of a topic where the cathedral doesn't lie as a matter of routine. So under these conditions, the idea that most of this can be solved and public trust in the media restored simply by firing the worst elements and pressure the rest to moderate, this idea is, quite frankly, laughable. Not to mention that these so-called worst elements, this routine of worst elements comes with the implication that only a minority of the media are, partisan hacks, which is, by the way, also false. The overwhelming majority of reporters in the cathedral are militant, partisan, far leftist hacks. This, my fellow deplorables, is war. And make no mistake about that. The cathedral knows it. They know it they're in a war. They've been fighting this war for decades and are accustomed to normal people not fighting back. Now, the media will reform, all right, but not the way careful, considerate, and polite mainstream liberals and conservatives alike imagine. No. The reform in the media will be brutal. Then by brutal, I don't mean necessarily violent, but brutal in terms of its swiftness. Signs of that are already seen. The New York Times, a former newspaper, and in other times the paper on record, nowadays not even the toilet paper on record. Anyway, the New York Times has minuscule audiences when compared even with mediocre blogs. The New York Times claims it has an audience of roughly 2.8 million people per day, if you include the digital-only editions and the print distribution, and if you really cook up the numbers. That may seem a lot until you realize that the Drudge Report has more. To put things into perspective, the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Washington Post combined have a smaller daily circulation than many YouTubers. The Wall Street Journal is marginally smaller than Breitbart. So is Washington Post, and the New York Times is significantly smaller than Breitbart. And by the way, the New York Times stopped releasing its data this year for some reason. Vanity Fair was triumphantly writing in late May that Breitbart's numbers are cratering. Well, minor drops in traffic during summertime is not that unusual, but Vanity Fair itself actually gets 6 times fewer visitors, and when it gets them, they hang out 59 seconds on the site, whilst on Breitbart they hang out 3 minutes and 47 seconds on average. Translation: people go to Breitbart to read the news. People go to Vanity Fair just to see the latest headlines in leftist retardation La La Land. This is what media reform looks like. The public, slowly but surely, will tune out, and there's nothing anyone can do about it, except to fire over 90% of the staff, abandon the far-left audience to the Daily Kos, The Guardian, and other purulent swamps, and start catering to the wider non-leftist majority. Now, that doesn't mean become Breitbart, but it does mean become less of a Washington Compost, less of the Pravda on Hudson, or the British Bollocks Corporation. But since that's not going to happen, the only other way will be the capitalistic way. And creative destruction, mind you, is part and parcel of capitalism. I mean, typewriters were destroyed by computers, horse carriages were destroyed by cars, and so on and so forth. The current cathedral will also be destroyed. Maybe not entirely, but really for the most part. So, to circle the point back, by the end of next year, the narrative on the media will be forever shifted the way it was shifted on feminism. You know, when I got into anti-feminism, publicly questioning feminism was almost social suicide. Today, even most leftist voters assume there's something wrong with being a feminist. Support for feminism is in single digits, and even in the most polite circles, saying I am a feminist means you gotta get ready to defend yourself. Same with the media. Saying in 2010 that the media lies in lockstep would have branded you a conspiracist loon. By the end of 2018, the reverse will be true. Saying that the media is largely trustworthy will be something you'd have to defend in polite conversation, as everyone will know that that's simply not true. So yeah, this is simply meant to inform. If you're in the cathedral and watching this, get ready, cause we're coming for you all. Just the other day I was watching a protest held on CNN's world headquarters. The cathedral didn't cover it, of course, but over 300,000 people watched it live, which is more people than CNN shows get most of the time. But more on that in an upcoming video about the usefulness of protests. Alright, so that's enough for now. With all of that being said, thank you all for watching. Thank you for your continuous and generous support. May I remind you that we're starting the Hungary, Georgia, Armenia tour very soon. So if you can, please do consider throwing in a few shekels for that particular endeavor. Follow me on the usual social media, Gab, Twitter, and Facebook. And I'll see you all soon on Freedom Alternative.